My parents tried to steal my $61 million inheritance after my real grandma died. But I destroyed their plans. I still remember the color of the car. It was a pale green minivan with a dent on the side, our family car. The one I used to fall asleep in during long road trips. The one my dad swore he'd fix every summer but never did. That was the last car I saw before everything changed. I was 8 years old when my parents drove me out to the countryside and dropped me off at my grandmother Eleanor's house. It was raining that day, heavy, summer rain, the kind that made the gravel stick to your shoes and turned the air thick with the smell of wet earth. My mom hugged me a little too fast. My dad barely looked me in the eye. They told Grandma they just needed a little time to figure things out. A couple of weeks, max. Before we go further, don't forget to like this story if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Be good for Grandma, my mom said, forcing a smile. Then they drove off. No wave, no backward glance, just the sound of tires spinning on wet gravel. And then, silence. Grandma Eleanor stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her cardigan, watching them disappear. She didn't speak for a long time, just looked down at me with something I couldn't name back then. It wasn't pity. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, like she already knew. She reached out her hand. Come inside, Ava. You're safe here. I don't know why, but I believed her. Maybe it was the way she said it, like it was a fact, not a promise. Like it was already true. That first night, I cried myself to sleep on a strange pillow, in a strange bed, in a house that smelled like old books and fresh-baked bread. But even through the tears, I felt safer than I had in months. The weeks stretched into months. The months into years. No calls. No visits. Not even a birthday card. Eventually, I stopped asking when they were coming back. Grandma never said anything bad about them. But she also never gave me false hope. She'd say, sometimes people leave, not because you're not enough, but because they are. That stuck with me more than I understood at the time. Eleanor became my world. She was strong, not just in the way she carried groceries or managed her garden, but in the way she carried me. My questions, my heartbreak, my confusion. She owned a small but powerful investment firm. People respected her. She was known in the business world for her no-nonsense attitude and sharp instincts. But at home, she was just my grandma, the woman who made blueberry pancakes from scratch, the one who taught me how to braid my hair and balance a checkbook in the same afternoon. She used to say, Ava, knowledge is your weapon. People can steal money. They can even steal your time. But if you know who you are and what you're worth, they can't touch you. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would become. By the time I was 13, I had stopped missing my parents. I still had questions, of course I did. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was focused on my future. And Grandma Eleanor made sure I knew I had one. She saw something in me, a spark she said reminded her of herself. She signed me up for a science summer camp at the local college, bought me every space book she could find, and cheered louder than anyone when I won the state science fair. That trophy still sits on my bookshelf. But back then, it was the first time I felt like I mattered. And every win, every tiny milestone, Eleanor was there. Clapping, hugging, proud. She never treated me like a burden or a leftover. She treated me like a legacy. Sometimes, at night, I'd lie in bed and wonder about them. Where were they? Did they even think about me? Did they ever regret leaving? But I never said those questions out loud. Because deep down, I think I already knew the answer. Then came the day that would change everything. I was 17 when it happened. The sky was that kind of eerie blue that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I got a call from the hospital. Eleanor had collapsed at the office. A stroke. Massive. Unexpected. I rushed there, heart pounding, hands shaking. She was unconscious when I arrived. They let me sit beside her, hold her hand, whisper things I couldn't say when she was awake. Please don't go, I whispered. I still need you. She died later that night. Peacefully. With me beside her. Her funeral was small but elegant, just like her. A handful of colleagues, some old neighbors, and me. And then, they showed up. My parents. After 10 years of silence. 10 years of absence. They walked in dressed in black like they belonged there, like they weren't ghosts in the room. My mother cried big, loud sobs that didn't seem real. My father hugged me like he had a right to. They said things like, "We should have been there for you. We made mistakes. We're still your family." And all I could think was, why now? Why today? Why at her funeral? Then I saw it. That glint in my father's eye. The way my mother kept glancing at the estate lawyer across the room. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They weren't here to grieve. They were here for the money. The morning of the will reading felt like walking into a storm I could already smell from miles away. I arrived early, dressed in black slacks and Eleanor's favorite burgundy scarf, the one she wore on every big occasion. It still smelled faintly like her, lavender, ink, and warm tea. Holding on to that tiny piece of her made me feel braver than I was. The lawyer's office was cold and quiet, tucked inside a downtown building that looked older than the city itself. Inside, the air was thick with tension and perfume. My mother had arrived before me, seated beside my father like they were the grieving parents of the year. They smiled when I walked in. "Hi, sweetheart," my mom said, standing as if we were just picking up where we left off. "You look so grown up." My father added, "We're proud of you. Your grandmother must have done a good job." I nodded but didn't respond. Not out of politeness. Out of restraint. Because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop what would come out. Mr. Green, Eleanor's longtime attorney, entered the room a few minutes later holding a leather folder. He was tall, lean, silver-haired, and all business. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Let's begin." He didn't waste time. As executor of Eleanor Lancaster's estate, I've been instructed to read her final will in full, with all beneficiaries present. He looked directly at me as he opened the folder and began. "To my granddaughter, Ava Lancaster, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all personal property, real estate holdings, stock assets, and the controlling interest in Lancaster Capital. Total value at the time of death, $61 million. My breath caught in my throat. $61 million? I knew Eleanor was successful. I knew she built something important. But this? I glanced at my parents. And there it was. That flicker. That flash of greed. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's smile froze. And the silence in the room became deafening. Mr. Green continued, ignoring the shift in energy. "Additionally, Eleanor has included a letter addressed to Ava, which I will give you privately." He cleared his throat and added, "There are no other named beneficiaries." Boom. That was it. No room for interpretation. No shared percentages. No conditional clauses. Everything, every last cent, was mine. My mother spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to laugh. "There must be a mistake. Eleanor wouldn't just cut out her own daughter. That's absurd." Mr. Green raised an eyebrow. "Actually, she did. Deliberately." My father leaned forward. "We're her family. We were supposed to be there, but things happened. This is a misrepresentation. It's not what she would have wanted." "No," I said, my voice finally rising. "It's exactly what she wanted." They both turned to me, stunned that I had the nerve to speak. "She gave me everything, because she was the only one who ever showed up for me," I said. "You left me at her doorstep like I was a problem to solve. And now you're back because she solved it." My mother's face went pale. "Ava, no," I snapped. "Don't pretend this is about love. You abandoned me, and now you want what she earned." Mr. Green spoke up, calm and collected. "There's something else," he said, pulling out another sheet of paper. "A legal document, signed by both of you, dated over a decade ago. In it, you formally relinquished custody and any claim to Ava Lancaster in exchange for a one-time payment." I stared at them. "You were paid to give me up?" They looked down. Not even the decency to deny it. My throat tightened. The air felt heavier. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a receipt. "You didn't just leave me. You sold me." Mr. Green handed me Eleanor's letter. I didn't open it right away. I wanted to wait until I was alone. But I did look my parents in the eye as I stood up and said, "I don't owe you anything. Not money. Not forgiveness. Not a place in my life." My mother's voice cracked. "We're your parents." "No," I said. "You're strangers. And strangers don't get a seat at the table." I turned and walked out of the office, letter in hand, scarf around my neck, and Eleanor's voice in my head. "Protect what's yours, Ava. They will come for it. Be ready." She wasn't wrong. She never was. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood by a bench near the river and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. My sweet Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I hate that I'm not beside you in this moment. But I need you to know something. Everything I built was with you in mind. I saw their intentions long ago. I cut them out of my life not out of spite, but to protect you. I gave them a choice, and they made it. Now, you get to make yours. Don't let anyone shame you for receiving what was already yours. You earned this, not with greed, but with love. You are my legacy, Ava. Make me proud. Love always, Grandma Eleanor. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. It was never about the money. It was about being chosen. Finally. Fully. Unapologetically. And now? I was done surviving. It was time to take everything she gave me and build a life she'd be proud of. They didn't even wait a week. Just 4 days after the will reading, a courier knocked on my door and handed me an envelope. Inside? A summons. My parents were suing me for control of Eleanor's estate. The claim? That I was mentally unfit to manage the inheritance. That Eleanor had been manipulated. That I was coached into isolating myself from them, and that they, my biological parents, were the rightful trustees of her fortune. I just stood there, staring at the paper. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but fury. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. It wasn't about making amends. It was about control, power, money. They were trying to drag me into court, hoping I'd be too scared to fight. What they didn't realize, Eleanor didn't raise me to fold. She raised me to rise. That night, I sat with Mr. Green in his office again. I was afraid this might happen, he said, adjusting his glasses. But the will is airtight. Your grandmother planned for everything. He pulled out a thick file and handed it to me. Eleanor recorded video messages. One for the board, one for the court, one for you. She wanted her voice to be heard, just in case they pulled something like this. I blinked. She recorded all that? He nodded. She knew them better than you think. I didn't cry, though my chest ached. Eleanor was gone, but she was still protecting me. Mr. Green leaned back in his chair. We'll counter. You're not alone, Ava. They don't stand a chance. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, my parents turned up the pressure. I started getting weird texts from unknown numbers. Stuff like, she wouldn't want you to be alone. It's not too late to do the right thing. We're still your family. Then came the public smear campaign. My father gave a tearful interview to a local blog, calling me an ungrateful, confused child who had been used by a wealthy grandmother to punish her own daughter. My mother wrote some sappy Facebook post that ended up going viral. She called me brainwashed and said I refused to let my family love me. The comments section lit up with sympathy. People called me cold, ungrateful, spoiled. And I'll admit, it hurt. For a few days, I questioned everything. Was I too harsh? Was I being selfish? Did I owe them something? Then I watched Eleanor's video. It was simple. She was sitting in her study, a warm mug beside her, and that fire in her eyes I miss so much. If you're seeing this, it means they're doing exactly what I knew they'd try. Ava, don't let their performance sway you. I know the world is going to paint them as victims, but they made their choice when they walked away from you and then tried to sell their silence for a check. You owe them nothing. You were always the strongest person in the room. You just didn't know it yet. I watched it 3 times in a row. By the end, I wasn't doubting anymore. I was ready. The courtroom smelled like paper and old wood. My parents sat at their table in pristine suits, playing the role of heartbroken parents like it was a Broadway show. Their lawyer spun a tale of abandonment, misguidance, and manipulation. They talked about how Eleanor soured me against them, how I'd been left with deep emotional trauma and was incapable of handling the pressure of wealth and leadership. Then it was our turn. Mr. Green stood up. Calm, clear, clinical. He laid out every document, every custody waiver, every financial record showing they hadn't spent a dime on me in over a decade. Then he pulled out the video. The judge watched silently as Eleanor spoke, unflinching and direct. Her words landed like gavel strikes, final, undeniable. By the end of the video, my parents' faces were pale. Mr. Green closed his argument with one line. This isn't a case of a minor being taken advantage of. This is a case of 2 adults returning to a child they abandoned only after they realized she inherited more than they ever had. The judge didn't even deliberate long. Case dismissed. With prejudice. Which meant not only were their claims denied, but they couldn't bring them up again. Ever. My parents stood up in shock. My mother stammered. We're still her parents. The judge looked down at them and said flatly, "No, you were her parents. That role, like your rights, was forfeited the moment you sold them." Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Mics in my face. Questions flying. But I wasn't interested in the spotlight. I didn't want a headline. I just wanted peace. I walked past them all. A woman tried to shove a microphone at me. "Ava, what do you have to say to your parents after all this?" I stopped, turned toward the cameras, and said, "Sometimes family is who raises you. Sometimes it's who walks away. But I know who I am, and I know who stood by me when no one else did. That's who I fight for. That's who I live for. The rest, they're just noise." After the lawsuit was over and the headlines faded, I expected things to get quieter. But they didn't. If anything, things got louder, in a different way. Because now that the money was mine, everyone had an opinion on how I should use it. Old classmates reached out. "So proud of you, Ava." People I barely remembered from middle school sent me long messages. "We should catch up sometime. I always knew you'd do something great." Even a few former teachers reached out. One of them actually sent me a startup pitch deck. But through it all, I kept hearing Eleanor's voice in my head. Money is loud. Power is louder. But legacy? That speaks long after you're gone. I didn't want to just have money. I wanted to do something that mattered. And that meant stepping into a world I never thought I'd belong to, the company. Eleanor's empire. Walking into the company's headquarters for the first time as its majority owner felt surreal. The building was this glass and marble tower downtown, sleek, intimidating, filled with people in tailored suits who probably assumed I was there for an internship. I could feel their eyes on me. The whispers. The judgment. "She's the girl who inherited everything. She's just a kid. A fluke. She'll run this place into the ground." And honestly, part of me worried they were right. I didn't have a business degree. I didn't understand portfolios or shareholder meetings, yet. But I wasn't there to sit at the head of the table and pretend to know everything. I was there to learn. That first week, I sat in every department meeting I could. Marketing, legal, operations, risk management. I took notes like a college freshman on the first day of class. The CEO at the time, a man named Carl Matthews, pulled me aside and said, "Ava, no one expects you to actually do anything. Just stay visible. Be a figurehead. The board will handle the rest." I smiled politely, but inside, I was already planning his replacement. I hired a mentor, a woman named Teresa Vaughn, one of Eleanor's closest friends and one of the most respected private equity minds in the country. She was sharp, blunt, and didn't treat me like a kid. "You're not here to prove you're your grandmother," she said in our first meeting. "You're here to prove that you're you. So stop apologizing for being in the room and start owning it." That hit me like a lightning bolt. I wasn't Eleanor, but I was Ava, and I had survived enough to know I wasn't here by accident. Over the next year, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I enrolled in business courses, took finance classes online, sat in boardrooms where people tried to talk over me, and made sure they never did again. The first time I presented a growth strategy to the company board, there was this moment of silence after I finished. Then one of the directors, an older guy who hadn't looked up from his phone all meeting, leaned forward and said, "Well, damn. Eleanor would have loved that." It wasn't approval I was chasing, but it felt good to earn respect, not for what I inherited, but for what I delivered. I made one big change that Eleanor always wanted to do but never had time to finish. I overhauled the company's philanthropic division and fully merged it with the Hope Foundation, her passion project to support underprivileged youth. We tripled the budget, funded scholarships, launched mentorship programs for girls in tech, started an emergency housing program for teens aging out of foster care. Because I remembered what it felt like to be dropped off at someone's door like unwanted mail. And if I could stop even one kid from feeling that way, it was worth every cent. I still lived in Eleanor's old townhouse. Still drove her 12-year-old Toyota Corolla. Reporters loved asking me, "Why don't you buy something nicer?" And I always answered the same way, because I don't need to impress people who don't know me. One day, after a company quarterly meeting, Teresa pulled me aside. She looked at me for a long time, arms crossed. Then she smiled. "You're not the girl who walked in here a year ago." I smiled back. "No, I'm the woman who belongs here now." I wasn't just the heir anymore. I was the architect of what came next. And every time I sat in Eleanor's old chair at the boardroom table, I didn't feel pressure. I felt peace. Because I wasn't there to protect what she built. I was there to grow it, to honor her name by making my own. By the time the second year passed, my parents had gone silent. No more lawsuits. No more fake interviews or half-hearted apologies in the press. Nothing. It was as if they had finally accepted that I wasn't the girl they could push around anymore. And I hadn't thought about them in a while, not really. Not until one afternoon, when I found something unexpected tucked away in one of Eleanor's antique cabinets. It was a bundle of old letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. Some were from former colleagues. A few from friends. One was from me, drawn in crayon when I was 9. And at the very bottom, in an envelope yellowed with time, was one in my mother's handwriting. Unopened. Unsent. It wasn't addressed to Eleanor. It was addressed to me. I hesitated before opening it. But curiosity won. Inside, just one line. "We had to do what was right for us. I hope someday you'll understand." No love, Mom. No signature. No warmth. Just that. A justification. A plea for forgiveness without the courage to ask for it out loud. I folded it back up and sat there for a long time, staring out the window of Eleanor's old reading room. That was the moment I decided I needed to write them back. Not to reopen wounds. Not for revenge. But for closure, the kind that only I could give myself now. Scroll the letter. "Dear Nora and Alan, it's been almost 3 years since Grandma Eleanor passed, and 2.5 since you tried to take everything she left me. I used to rehearse letters like this in my head all the time. Angry ones. Tearful ones. The kind where I'd imagine you finally seeing what you did to me. But I'm not that girl anymore. I don't write from pain now. I write from peace. And you don't deserve my pain. I want you to know that I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm thriving. I didn't just inherit her fortune. I inherited her fight, her integrity, her vision. You walked away from me when I was 8. And when you finally returned, you didn't ask who I'd become. You asked what I had. And when the answer didn't include you, you tried to rewrite the rules. That was your choice. And I've made mine. You will not have a place in my life. Not now. Not later. Not in photos, not in press, not in legacy. And while I don't wish you harm, I will not protect you from the consequences of your own actions. Grandma once said, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person who hurt you. So I'm giving myself that gift today. I forgive you. Not because you earned it, but because I no longer carry you with me. You're not part of my past anymore. You're just something I walked through to get here. Take care. Ava, I didn't send the letter. I didn't need to. Writing it was enough. That night, I burned it in the fireplace Eleanor used to sit beside every winter. The flames crackled as the pages curled and blackened, piece by piece. And with every word that turned to ash, I felt lighter. Like I was finally closing the door. Not slamming it. Just gently locking it behind me. In the weeks that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from money or headlines or courtroom wins, but the kind that comes when you stop chasing what will never love you back. I still visit Eleanor's grave sometimes. I bring coffee. Sit on the bench near the magnolia tree. Tell her what we're working on at the foundation, who I hired at the company, how Micah, the boy we funded through a scholarship, got into MIT. And I always leave a note that says the same thing. I'm still making you proud. Because in the end, it wasn't the money that changed my life. It was the woman who saw my worth when no one else did. The woman who chose me when my own parents did not. And now, I carry that love like armor. Like legacy. Like fire. It had been almost 4 years since I stood on their porch. For years since the funeral. For years since the lawsuit. For years since I looked into the eyes of the 2 people who gave me life, and then tried to rob me of the one I had built. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for her. For Eleanor. For the little girl I used to be. The one who stood on this very step, holding a suitcase too heavy for her 8-year-old arms, watching a green minivan disappear down the gravel road. The house looked smaller now. The yard was overgrown. The paint on the porch chipped. A mailbox leaned to one side like it had given up years ago. No one lived there anymore. They'd sold it after the lawsuit failed. It sat vacant now, a hollow memory with peeling curtains and a rusted screen door. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, heart pounding for reasons I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was anger. Maybe grief. Maybe just the ghosts. I stepped onto the porch and ran my hand along the wooden railing. I remembered this porch vividly. I remembered sitting here, knees tucked to my chest, waiting for them to return. For someone to return. But no one ever did. And then, I remembered the woman who opened the door. Eleanor. Hair pulled back. Hands steady. Voice soft but certain. Come inside, Ava. You're safe here. I swallowed the lump in my throat and let the silence wrap around me. There was no one here now. No door to open. Just the memory of what I'd lost and what I'd found. I sat on the porch for a while, letting the sun warm my face. I thought about how far I'd come since that day. How far I'd walked without them. I thought about the boardroom at the company. The kids we were sending to college through the Hope Foundation. The lives we'd helped change. I thought about Eleanor's voice in that video, calling me her legacy. And I thought about the little girl who once felt like she wasn't enough. She had no idea who she would become. But she never gave up. I pulled out the small note card I'd written that morning. I placed it in the mailbox, even though I knew no one would read it. It simply said, I forgive you, but I will not carry you any further. I've built something better, and I won't look back. I stepped off the porch, walked to the car, and drove away for the last time. That night, I called Teresa and told her I was ready. Ready to take over as chair of the company. Ready to expand the foundation into 3 new states. Ready to build the next chapter, not as the girl they abandoned, but as the woman I became in spite of it. A few weeks later, I stood on stage at a gala we hosted for the Hope Foundation. The ballroom was packed, donors, press, mentors, students. I gave a short speech, simple and from the heart. They left me. But someone else stepped in. She didn't give me money. She gave me belief. And now, I get to pass that on. That's legacy. That's power. And that's the life I choose every single day. Applause roared through the room. But all I could think about was Eleanor. And how proud she would have been. Later, someone asked me, don't you ever wish they'd apologized? That they'd come back and made it right? I smiled and said, they did come back. And they showed me exactly who they were. That was the apology. And I accepted it when I walked away.